Welcome, clinical educators, to the Clinical Educator Online Orientation for the UNC Charlotte Cato College of Education and the Office of School and Community Partnerships. This short video screencast is going to set up additional materials and inform clinical educators of important processes and other webinars and recordings that will take place during this semester. First and foremost, though, we would like to thank you. Without you, our candidates would not have the opportunity to practice the art of teaching, and for this, we are very grateful. Our program has gone through several changes and adjustments, all in the best interest of our candidates, our school partners, and most importantly, the students in our classrooms. This screencast will deliver information on those changes and direct you to other resources that are critical to the success of our shared responsibility with these new teacher candidates. We're going to start with the new clinical educator. Previously, we referred to the mentor teacher as the cooperating teacher, and some of you may have served in this role. The old cooperating teacher role had many positive effects on our candidates, but sometimes the expectations were not set in advance for the cooperating teacher. We've now created the clinical educator model, and this has very specific set expectations that we do provide professional development around. In the new clinical educator model, we're looking for positive support, we're looking for in-the-moment specific feedback, we're talking about modeling best practices and coaching the candidates daily to be fully prepared to teach the students in your classroom. Before we get too deep into the content of this screencast, I do want to remind you that there is an honorarium and confidentiality statement that needs to be completed almost immediately. We need this so that we can process your paperwork so that you can receive your stipend for hosting a student teacher. In the Resources tab on the OSCP Clinical Educator page, you will find a video that does show you how to fill out this paperwork, and the paperwork links are found right below that short video. Please remember, this needs to be done as soon as possible in order to set you up to receive that stipend. Now let's talk about building relationships and mentorship. As we embark on many program improvements for our candidates and school partners, one function in this process remains a constant: the need for building strong, working relationships with all involved, mainly the CE and student teacher. Here are some suggestions to start this process when you meet your student teaching candidate. First, you can have a conversation about why they chose education as a career path. At the same time, you'll want to tell them why you chose education, because we all come from different backgrounds and probably had different reasons why we chose to become teachers. You want to discuss outside of school interests with family and friends, but without being too intrusive. This gives us an opportunity to see what people enjoy doing and see if there's any commonalities. Talk about priorities in your lives and how they impact you on a daily basis. This will allow you to see what sort of commitments might come into play during this student teaching semester. And finally, start talking about the classroom and students as our instead of my or yours. This is going to create a feeling of co-ownership in the process and makes that student teaching candidate feel instantly involved. These are just some of the conversations that are going to allow you to get a better feel for the personality of the student teaching candidate you're working with, and them to have a better idea of your personality. And this is going to allow for a more open and productive working relationship. Here are some additional notes on relationship and mentorship. There's an additional screencast resource that can be found in the CE resources just below this short video. Some of the recommended activities on the Getting to Know Your Candidate will help you understand who they are and how they approach the process, and allows you to get some insight into how they operate on a day-to-day basis. Some past situations where student teachers and clinical educators did not see eye to eye could have been avoided if there was a better understanding between the two. Future webinars are also going to discuss building relationships or having some crucial conversations. An exciting new addition to our program is coaching. This new change is going to allow us some real-time active participation with our student teachers in the classroom. This type of CE and student-teacher process is going to require some signals, pre-planning, to determine the best way to handle in-the-moment coaching, where the clinical educator can be actively involved in the lesson, especially when the student teacher needs them the most. We have included an additional video screencast in our resources for you to learn more about this process. Once again, there's going to be future webinars in this series that will address this topic and help you build on these skills. Now let's talk about some student teaching requirements. The following are just some of these key student teaching requirements that you'll discuss in your in-person or virtual initial visit with one of our OSCP site coordinators that's going to be working with you and your student teaching candidate this semester. The first thing we want to make sure that you know is that candidates will teach full-time after a gradual pickup for at least 20 consecutive school days. All right? That means that we're not talking about teacher work days or any holidays. We're talking about actual teaching days. After that, they're going to release in a gradual manner, just like they picked up. Number two, very important, and you'll get more information on this a little bit later in the screencast, but EdTPA is now a North Carolina initial licensure requirement for all candidates, and the project is due on 10/10/19, October 10th, 2019. This is going to be required of all candidates across the state, regardless of program or whether or not they are residency/lateral entry. Candidates will also follow the school district calendar through December 4th, 2019. So this is a 16-week process. Once again, more breadth and depth of this information will be provided at the initial visit with that aforementioned OSCP site coordinator assigned to you and your student teacher. This brings us to the assessment documents that we're going to use as site coordinators, clinical educators, and student teaching candidates throughout this upcoming semester. You can see there's 4 items listed here, and I'm briefly going to show you an example of all 4 of these items. The first item is the STAR, the Student Teaching Assessment Rubric. This is a tool that we've used for several years, and you may be familiar with the name, but you might not be familiar with some of the new changes to this tool that's going to be used during observation windows, but is not solely tied to those observations. Let's take a look at the Student Teaching Assessment Rubric and where you can find it. On your screen, you can see a 2019 student folder example. Every single site coordinator, clinical educator, and student teacher will have access to a Google folder that looks just like this. There will be a clinical educator folder, a site coordinator folder, and a student teacher folder that they will all have access to. Just below that, you can see what's called the Student Teaching Assessment Rubric. Let's open that up and take a look. As we take a look at this document, you can see that there are directions for each individual stakeholder in the group and how they are going to use this document. As we scroll down through this document, I want to draw your attention to some of the important pages. Page 3 is what's called the STAR Student Teacher Self-Evaluation. This self-evaluation is what the students are going to use during the observation periods, but not necessarily based on one single observation. The student teaching candidate is going to award themselves a score between 1 and 4 on all of these elements. This will happen during those 3 scoring periods, and then they will give themselves a final rating at the end. Here's a look at the elements. Number 1 is learning environment. Number 2, student differences. You'll see there's a scoring page. We'll come back to that. Number 3 is planning for instruction. Number 4, instructional strategies. Number 3 and 4, scoring pages come next, followed by element 5, application of content knowledge. Number 6, assessment, the scoring pages for those elements. Then you can see number 7, digital teaching and learning. Collaboration for student success is number 8. Again, the scoring pages for those individual elements. And then the final 2 elements, number 9, professional learning and reflection, and number 10, student teaching course requirements. This is very important. Number 10, the student teaching course requirements. The student teacher will self-evaluate themselves on that element, and the site coordinator will score the student teacher on that element. But that element deals with course requirements outside of student teaching and will not be scored by the individual clinical educator. All right, let's scroll back up to the top and take a look at what we mean by the elements and the scoring. I'm just going to use one particular element and show you how the rubric breaks down and how this is going to be scored during the different periods. You can see number 1, the learning environment, and you can see the different levels for the rubric. You have emerging for level 1, developing is level 2, proficient is level 3. That is the target level for all student teaching candidates on all elements, a level 3. Beyond level 3 is accomplished, which is a level 4, which cannot be achieved without first achieving proficiency at level 3. In order to achieve proficiency, candidates have to display the ability to hit each one of the individual indicators that falls under the level 3. So you can see under learning environment, there are 3 elements. If a student teacher does not meet one of those 3 indicators, then they will only be judged to be at the developing level or level 2. How to score this comes next. As you can see, there are different assessment periods. You can see during the first assessment period, the site coordinator is going to be the only person that scores this document. In the second assessment period, the clinical educator is going to score in this document. During the third assessment period, again, the site coordinator is going to score this document, and then we will create a final rating between the clinical educator and the site coordinator. Now, we're going to talk about the document that's going to drive the clinical educator's day-to-day and week-to-week feedback and development of their student teaching candidate. More about the STAR will be discussed at initial visits, where you'll be able to ask questions of the OSCP site coordinator who is well versed in this document. Here we are back at the Google Drive folder example of a student folder. I'm going to click on the Clinical Educator tab. Inside the Clinical Educator tab, you see several documents that are going to be discussed at initial visit, and I'll make reference to during this screencast. But the one I want to draw your attention to is the observation feedback form. You can see that there's 3 months, September, October, and November, and when we open up any one of those months, you are going to find documents that are all identical. We're just going to click on the week of September 2nd and take a look at what an OFF is. The OFF is the observation feedback form. This is going to be used by clinical educators and site coordinators, but most importantly, clinical educators on a weekly basis. That's why there's 3 folders for each month that the student teacher is going to be observed, and 4 documents in there to complete during those months. Inside the observation feedback form, there is going to be space for general observation notes. There's going to be a spot where you can highlight some of the strengths of the student teaching candidate and then some areas for improvement. Once some areas of improvement have been indicated, we can create some suggestions for how that student teaching candidate is going to address the areas that they need to improve. This is one of our new changes. This form needs to be filled out weekly. We also need you to communicate with your student teaching candidate and have a conversation about this form. Additional information for TEI participants can be found below on coaching. More can be discussed at the initial visit, again with that OSCP site coordinator who is well versed in using this document. Alright, here we are again at the example student Google Drive folder. There's two more items that we want to look at that clinical educators are going to be either solely responsible for or will also fill out with the site coordinator. Let's take a look at those items. Under the final assessment document, if we click on that tab, we're going to find those two more documents. The first one is the assessment of professional education dispositions. If you're a clinical educator that has served a YLI or year-long candidate at this point, you've seen this form before. This form evaluates the candidate's ability to have an impact on the classroom, their identity and growth, their leadership abilities, the advocacy of the students, their ability to collaborate, and their adherence to ethical practices. This form will be filled out at the end of the semester. Again, more information or questions that you have can be answered by the OSCP site coordinator assigned to you and your student teaching candidate. Our next document is the Certification of Teaching Capacity, or the CTC. This document is going to be filled out twice, once at midterm and once at the end. At the midterm, the site coordinator, clinical educator, and student teacher will talk about which areas have been met and which ones have not been met. And at that point, they will make a to-do list of what to do in order to meet all of the requirements by the end of the semester so that the official form can be completed and students will be recommended for licensure. Once again, there's a video resource that talks about this document, and again, your OSCP site coordinator is well versed in this document and can answer any questions you might have. That concludes this slide on assessment documents. The STAR, the OFF, the CTC, and the professional disposition forms will all be discussed at the initial visit and can also be found in a video called Required Documents. Another new change is the Faculty Site Coordinator. The Faculty Site Coordinator is the new title for the former University Supervisor. The name is not the only change, as the site coordinators will now be more hands-on, doing coaching sessions and walkthroughs along with completing the STAR rubric as they have in the past. The eventual goal for this new position is to have multiple student teaching candidates in a single school site where the site coordinators can work weekly with both the clinical educators and student teachers. Finally, the site coordinators will still be that initial point of contact for both the student teachers and clinical educators to deal with any issues or concerns that arise throughout the semester. Now let's talk about the calendar and schedule. At the initial visit, the site coordinator is going to discuss the calendar for the semester as it applies to the following: observation windows along with the documentation used, suggested assumption of teaching responsibilities, EdTPA due dates and seminars, important dates for candidates like application for graduation. There will be special events that candidates will be invited to, and of course, there's the deadline to withdraw if applicable. Let's take a look at that calendar. Here's a copy of the semester calendar that clinical educators and site coordinators will use with their student teaching candidates this fall. You can see that it's broken down by month, and it's also broken down by assessment periods, in which documentation will need to be collected. All of the documentation used is listed right there, whether it's CE or SC to complete. You can also see that the aforementioned EdTPA due date is listed as Thursday, October 10th. Again, that is for all program areas. Please make sure that your student teaching candidate or site coordinator has shared a copy of this very important semester calendar with you. Next up is EdTPA and candidate support. As mentioned previously, EdTPA is a performance-based assessment, and here's some need-to-knows. EdTPA is 3 tasks, or 4 for LEd candidates, and deals with planning, instructing, and assessing. EdTPA is externally scored by scale-trained scorers, and it's managed by Pearson. Passing EdTPA is required for all North Carolina initially licensed candidates beginning this fall 2019. All student teaching candidates will be supported on the creation, completion, and submission of this project, and documents that describe your role as a clinical educator are available, as are links to a video about EdTPA in the Resources tab below. Please make sure that you review these materials with your OSCP site coordinator when they come for their initial visit. The next topic is the webinar schedule. The Office of School and Community Partnerships is dedicated to providing additional professional development opportunities for clinical educators, not just to start the semester, but all throughout, in the form of timely and informative webinars. There are weekly webinars scheduled throughout the semester, and a link to these topics and dates is going to be available under the Resources tab. If you cannot connect to the live webinar, we are recording them and creating video versions to be viewed for more flexibility for clinical educators. However, video versions will be accompanied by a quiz and links for CEs to complete. Completion of the webinar series, either live or doing it through the video with the attached quiz, will entitle clinical educators to CEUs this semester. Let's take a look at that webinar schedule. Alright, let's take a quick look at the clinical educator webinar schedule for the fall of 2019. You can see it begins on 8/29 and runs through 11/14. I will remind you that all webinars will have to be either attended live or video with quiz in order to get those CEUs. Once again, that webinar schedule begins on August 29th and goes through November 14th, 2019. Okay, before we finish up this video screencast and you can take a look at some of the other resources, let's talk about some pertinent facts. The Cato College of Education puts a high emphasis on culturally responsive teaching, and this should be evident by the work of our student teaching and graduate intern candidates. We also want you to know that our student teachers are afforded the same due process rights as you, the clinical educator, when they are in your classroom. Lastly, the Office of School and Community Partnership takes pride in communicating expectations and handling all situations where these are not met. So please do not hesitate to reach out to your individual site coordinator or the office in general if any of these situations arises that you believe warrants our attention. Let's finish with some important reminders. Please communicate as soon as possible with site coordinators to set up that initial visit if you haven't already. Please complete the honorarium and confidentiality forms as well. Please view all video screencasts in the series so that you're up to date on all the CE and ST responsibilities throughout the semester. Start building and working on that CE and ST relationship. Don't forget that candidates should begin working on their EdTPA immediately to prepare for that official submission on October 10th. Check out our webinar dates and topics in order to earn those CEUs. And lastly, and most importantly, because you could not attend a face-to-face orientation, we'll need you to complete a brief quiz to verify that you were able to view these materials. Alright, enjoy the resources and webinars, and thank you once again for participating in this important process.